So the last couple of programs we've been talking about recommendations, and we talked about nitrogen and sulfur and how we really try to feed the crop, especially with nitrogen, but sulfur as well, and how with phosphorus we really try to feed more of the soil and let the soil feed the plant. Potassium's a bit of a hybrid of that. Traditionally, we've always tried to feed the soil and let the soil feed the plant, but more and more we think a little bit about the crop's uptake during the season and how we might meet those plants' needs with potassium. I'm Tim Mundorf, Nutrient Management Lead with Central Valley Ag, and today on our Agronomy Focus video, we're going to talk about potassium and how we make those recommendations. In front of me today, I've got two different fertilizer products. Our traditional potassium chloride, or OO60. This is for a long time been the product we normally are going to make recommendations when we're making recommendations for potassium. It's all about trying to build soil test levels and have potassium available for the crop through the growing season. The other product I'm going to talk about, and we talk about this one quite a bit less, it's a product called Kmag. It comes from Mosaic. It's potassium magnesium sulfate. Provides potassium, provides a little magnesium for some of our soils which are low on magnesium, and also provides sulfur through the growing season in the sulfate form, so it is fairly ready for plant uptake. I'll talk more about potassium chloride as that long-term build the soil test and feed the soil to feed the crop. And I'll talk a little bit more about Kmag as our product maybe we think about as a top dress, a way to add some sulfur and potassium in season. You know, we've talked a little bit about plant uptake, especially when we were talking about nitrogen and sulfur. When we think again about rapid plant uptake, potassium very similar to nitrogen and sulfur in that, of course there's not much needed by that plant early in the season. Most of its needs are met by the seed early as we get past planting into emergence, V1, V2. But very similar to nitrogen, with rapid vegetative growth, we start to see a big uptake in potassium accumulation. And again, it starts to drop off later in the growing season, but still there's quite a bit of potassium to be taken up into the plant during grain fill. Potassium stays very mobile in the plant, so as the plant runs short, it will pull some from those lower leaves, which, to be honest with you, when we're pursuing top yield, we don't want it to do. We want those lower leaves to continue to produce photosynthates to make sugars and fill that crop grain. But as you think about the growing season, maybe through around that V6, V8 time frame, that's when we start to really see things take up, and they really start to taper off maybe around VT, brown silking, where things start to drop off, but there's still quite a bit of potassium to take up later in the growing season. But as we think about that mindset and moving from feeding the soil to feed the plant to also feeding the plant directly, we think about this period. Can we keep up with plant uptake for potassium during that rapid uptake period? When we think about that base potassium recommendation, it's very similar to phosphorus. Generally, we're going to try to build soil test levels. We're going to try to build to maybe 220 part per million. And for every part per million we're short of that target off the soil test. So again, we're going to want you to get out there and do some soil sampling. We're going to want you to take some intense soil samples so we've got more than just a few samples across your field to understand that variation. But we'll look at where you're at now. Let's just say you're at 200 part per million now, but we want you at 220. We usually figure it takes around 4 or 5 pounds of K2O to raise every part per million. So we'll have to add 4 pounds of K2O for every part per million we're short, and then maybe we'll divide that application across 4 years. So we spread out that build a little bit, and then we've got crop removal on top of that. Now, crop removal for corn tends to run about 0.3 pounds per bushel of yield for corn. For soybeans, it's quite a bit higher. It tends to run about 1.4 pounds of potassium for every bushel of soybeans. So here's our yield goal for soybeans, here's our yield goal for corn. As you can see, that can be a pretty good size recommendation if you're trying to build to 220, but if you've already got your soils in a pretty good range, the build portion of it won't be that much, and what you'll generally end up with a pretty good size crop removal portion of that recommendation. As we think back about these products I've got in front of us, potassium chloride is OO60. So if we've got our soil test level about where we want it, and we're trying to raise 200 bushel of corn that takes off about a third or 0.3 pounds of K2O per bushel, 200 bushel of corn is basically 100 pounds of potassium chloride, breaks you even with crop removal. You want to do a little bit more than that if you're trying to build soil test levels, Maybe if your soil test levels are fairly high, we won't even worry about replacing full crop removal. We'll just replace a portion of it. When we talk about Kmag, it's only about 22% K2O. So it's mainly more of a supplement. So if you've already got high soil test levels, this ends up being a good product to provide just a little potassium, during that time for rapid crop uptake. Also provides a little sulfur. And if either your tissue samples are showing you low in magnesium, or if you've got a sandier soil that's low in magnesium, it also provides about 11% mag. So if we were to put down 100 pounds of Kmag, that'd be 22 pounds of K2O, about 22 pounds of sulfur in the sulfate form, and also about 11 pounds of magnesium. It makes for a really nice top dress product, especially when you're trying to hit rapid crop uptake in a high yield environment. So as we think back again one more time to that crop uptake model and how we need to meet this rapid uptake of potassium, we might think about a top dress in season. Now, if you're irrigated, that could be through something like potassium thiosulfate or KTS. But if you're dry land, a product like this Kmag might be a great supplement. You put your base down with this 0060 product to get your soil test levels where you want them to be. That'll provide the majority of the potassium you need through the growing season. But maybe just before this rapid uptake period, we come back and do a top dress of something like Kmag. We could mix this with urea, we could mix this with ammonium sulfate, give you a kind of a blended product that we could meet everything from nitrogen to sulfur to potassium uptake during this rapid period where everything's a little tough, maybe to get through all the crop roots, especially when you're doing high plant populations of say 36, 40,000 plants where you've got a fairly small root system compared to the year that you're trying to grow. Hopefully this helps you think a little bit through potassium and the recommendations we make here at Central Valley Ag to get a little more in depth and to truly build a fertility program based around your needs on your fields and your farm with your soil test levels. Visit with your field sales agronomist and they can build a fertility program that's not just about fertilizer application. It's about that overall fertility and meeting the needs of the crop through the growing season. With Central Valley Ag, I'm Tim Mundorf, your nutrient management lead. Thank you for watching our agronomy focus video this week.